us. Got it. Awesome. Hi, I am Mingyun Lau. I am at Berklee College of Music. I've been teaching here for 3 years now. I use he, him pronouns. I identify as Chinese Malaysian, working internationally here or as an international faculty here at Berklee. So very excited to be here with my other faculty forum folks. Can we all say hi?
Hi,
Hi.
everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Just to reintroduce ourselves to y'all again, this steering committee has been quite silent since COVID. I think once we shifted committees, there was when the previous committee who did a lot of work to support music therapy faculty all across the US and across the globe in figuring out how to do teleeducation to all our students during the COVID times. Once that transitioned to us, we were trying to get things started, but the transition from teleeducation to or remote education to what we in person took a lot out of us as well. And we just now started to reorganize ourselves after a few of us dropped out and a few of us joined. And we are now ready to serve everyone again. We are not related to AMTA or CBMT. It's a self-organized group of faculty members from across the US trying to serve each other, to support one another through our exciting process of supporting our students in their music therapy education. And the topic at hand today is on AI and music therapy education, which is something that has risen in the past year or so when we realized, oh, AI is becoming a thing. It could be a resource. It could be our enemy. How does AI look like in education? How does AI look in music? How does AI look in music therapy? We don't know. We are exploring this right now. So we have fantastic guests with us today to share with us their expertise. The first guest speaker we have today is Dr. Eric So. He is a financial economist. I'm just reading from your bio right now. He is a financial economist and chaired professor in global economics and management group at MIT Sloan School of Management, where he holds the title of Sloan Distinguished Professor of Global Economics and Management. The reason why I invited Eric over is because he is a teammate of mine in my Dragon Boat team here in Boston. And last summer I was checking on him and I was like, oh, I haven't seen you on a boat in a while. What have you been doing? He's like, oh, I've been traveling across the US talking about AI and education. So I was like, perfect. You are the perfect person to start us off in sharing with us what is AI and education. So take it away, Eric.
Great. All right, everyone, thanks for being here. I'm excited to get to know you and hear about music therapy and share my thoughts. I'm really hoping today will be interactive because I'm not sure I have slides, but I'm certainly hope to hear from you as questions come up or points of discussion. So just as a quick outline for my talk, I want to talk a little bit about AI, specifically at MIT and MIT Sloan, and why this was such an eye-opening past 2 years for me. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the power and pitfalls of current AI models. So if you're new to AI and wondering how they work, I'm going to try to spend some time talking about that. And then finally, I'll give you a little bit of perspective in terms of frameworks for thinking about how to move forward. So with that in mind, let me just quickly start out with AI at MIT. So Mingwan already introduced me. I'm a tenured professor at MIT. One thing that's important to note as the next couple of slides is I teach a very quantitative, heavy finance elective called Alphanomics. And in that class, I asked students to analyze a lot of data sets where I asked them to backtest trading strategies and think about investment approaches, and I give them data sets to work on, and that will be relevant in a bit. So I wear many hats at MIT. Oh, one thing I should mention, my friends, my colleagues, my students, they call me ESO, which is just short for Eric So. I like this nickname, even though I've learned in certain accents it sounds a lot like asshole. I still like ESO a lot, so please feel free to call me that. So I wear a lot of hats around Sloan. I'm the director of our PhD program, but most relevant to today's discussion, I'm the lead faculty for the AI Hub, as well as the faculty director of this thing called the MIT AI Academy. So the path that I came here, that got to this point, really took this transition point last summer, as Mingwan alluded to earlier. So I remember this was like an important transition point in July of last year, almost 1 year ago. And I know it was a very important milestone for me, in part because I have my heart rate for the day. So this is a screenshot from my Apple Watch depicting my beats per minute throughout the course of the day. And as you can see, some things pretty drastically changed. And so what I want to talk a little bit about is just like what I discovered during that time frame and why it was so impactful to me. So this morning, that same morning, as my heart rate began to settle, I sent this very frazzled email. Okay, I don't expect you to be able to read it, but let me just say it was to various deans within MIT. And let me highlight the relevant parts. I said, I spent the morning feeling a bit frazzled. I tried out a new AI tool and it honestly scared/troubled me. Trying it out this morning made me realize that education and the broader economy are about to change very fast. Should we be thinking about changing what we teach? Future employees won't be required to do nearly as much coding, and AI seems already able to qualitatively assess data results. So what do I mean by that? What I meant is that that morning, I took an assignment that I normally give to my MBA students, where I ask them to backtest a trading strategy. And normally I assign this assignment to students who work in groups, and it took them about 6 hours to complete working in teams to help solve this problem. And what I did is I used the then current ChatGPT data analysis tool, which allowed me to upload data sets and which can itself code in Python based on plain English instructions, where Python is a coding language. And the really striking part to me was that AI did my assignment in under 2 minutes, and moreover, it did it perfectly. What do I mean by that is I uploaded my data set, and without me having to prompt or tell anything about this data set, it guessed the content. It could tell what the variables meant and possibly why they were useful. It could also sort of briefly summarize the data set and look for abnormalities. So this was just me getting started. So after I uploaded the data set, I took my assignment and I copied my homework prompts verbatim in terms of what students I asked, what questions I asked of students. And it began to process the data and it did it correctly. And moreover, what was really striking about this tool is that it's not just a means of analyzing data, it could also interpret the data like the student, meaning that it understood from context what the data was telling us, and it provided a very nice summary of what was happening. Additionally, it didn't stop in terms of summarizing data. It also has the capability to run more advanced analysis, to generate very fancy looking charts. So on the left was my homework assignment, asking students to backtest a trading strategy. And on the right was the plot of several steps of coding, followed by the result I was looking for, followed by the interpretation of what that data plot means. And what that meant is that this data assignment, or what AI was already capable of over a year ago, was to be able to process data and do some very complex analysis that would normally take my master's students, who are very quantitative heavy at MIT, to be able to do it in under 90 seconds. And what was so striking to me is many people have the viewpoint that, like, I'm just going to ask my students to show their work, and this is going to make sure that they, actually do the assignment. The problem, at least in the coding context, is that the system can generate the underlying code, meaning it can show you the steps it took to solve it, and then can also convert the underlying code into whatever language you like, meaning that if you simply ask students to show their work, it's not going to solve the problem. I'm going to talk a little bit more about AI and homework as we go, but hopefully you can start to get a sense of what was so striking to me, in that I realized that I'm going to have to completely change the way that I try to evaluate students who have access to these AI tools, which are becoming increasingly ubiquitous. So looking back on my email that I showed you earlier, I mentioned that, look, there's a big issue within education, and I don't know if you are prepared for how quickly and how drastically things are about to change, both in terms of how we evaluate students, but also in terms of what we even think to teach them, given that these technologies exist. So you may be able to tell from the title of the slide about what happened next. So I wrote to the dean's office and I said, we have this big problem and we really need someone to tackle it. And he said, fantastic, you're going to be up for the effort. And I was, quote unquote, voluntold to lead this three-front effort to prepare Sloan for teaching and learning in the space of generative AI. So what is this three-front effort? It really consists, at least initially, of 3 points, though we've expanded. The first is an AI hub, which is a website, a public-facing website that I'll share with you that provides resources for people who are learning to work with AI, to understand the terminology and how the technology works and how to think about applying it in terms of education. Additionally, on the bottom left, we ran a number of town hall demos, which is something that I really encourage all universities where I've spoken about implementing just to help people understand what the technology can do. But perhaps the biggest lift was on the bottom right, where we ran what was called a peer-to-peer program. But essentially, this was a class that I taught two tenured faculty members within Sloan about how to use AI and how to think about incorporating it into their classroom. So just on this point of the Resource Hub, there is this website called Generative AI for Teaching and Learning. The link is available there, but you can simply Google it. And if you go to that web page, you'll be greeted by this YouTube video with this very unfortunate freeze frame of like me appearing to sell you car insurance or something like that. But if you can look past it, there's a lot of great resources there where we teach people about AI basics, meaning like when we say AI, what do we mean? How do we think about generative AI? We give tools for people to start getting used to it. And also, one thing that's come up quite a bit is even simple things like how do we write policies into our syllabi to acknowledge that students have access to AI and can use it to help solve many of the problems. So all that stuff is available from our resource hub. The second thing, which is like the bigger lift, was this class that I ran for faculty. And this, I think, was really transformative to a lot of faculty and something that I encourage folks to consider for their organization, which is this faculty really had two underarching goals. The first was to use AI to help run a class more efficiently and potentially better. And what I mean by that is many people have the viewpoint that AI is this big threat. It's this thing that going to make their life worse or potentially, problematic for them. But really what this class is also designed to do is to get people to think about AI expanding our abilities as teachers, but not just as teachers, as researchers. And so we started to illustrate that AI doesn't have to be just a bad thing in the sense that you can use it to get rid of potentially troublesome tasks that you find problematic. So for instance, we showed people how to generate custom AI chatbots and tutors that were essentially there to be able to respond in real time to students' questions. We showed that AI is quite capable. For example, if you upload a grading rubric and then you ask students to upload their assignment, it can give the people detailed feedback on issues that came up in terms of their submissions. We also spend quite a bit of time redesigning assignments with AI in mind. And what AI does, among many other things, is it reduces the barriers to entry for a lot of more technical topics, including things like programming. The second goal of this program was to equip faculty with skills to teach students how to use AI, meaning that we showed them a lot of basic techniques that I think are really critical for understanding how to interact with AI in a productive way. So for example, you may have heard the term like prompt engineering. What does it really mean? It means how do we interact with an AI to get what we want? There's a learning curve to this process and something that there's some structure to. I can try to give you some hints. But what this means is that for a lot of people, when they first start using AI, they might type in something like quite silly, like, what should I have for lunch today? And without context, without knowing for whatever you have access to or your resources or circumstances, it gives you very superficial answers. But what we teach people is about how to use AI in a way that actually is going to generate things that they find useful. We also, of course, showed them how AI can be quite useful. So if you're not a programmer and you have a data set that you want to visualize or analyze, It's not really a big problem anymore because you can have AI systems do that for you. Additionally, we showed more advanced topics like building more complex AI workflows where you can insert AI into various types of systems in a process that we call lang chaining, where we're inserting these large language models into workflows. So I was going back to this three-prong approach, we're really proud of the progress that we made in the sense that we can tell that by teaching faculty, it's trickled down to our students in the sense that they are then able to use it. But we've also come up with a number of next steps that I encourage you guys to think about. One is we're rerunning and expanding our program, meaning that by teaching faculty, we know that the faculty can then teach the students. We are running what's called an AI boot camp for MBA students. So a couple, over a decade or two ago, we used to run these Excel modules for incoming MBA students, where we would train them to use Excel because we knew they're going to have to use it for all their assignments. What we're doing is essentially the same, where we're teaching people how to use AI before they get started, just to kind of level the playing field, recognizing there are going to be some folks that are extremely technical computer scientists who know a lot about AI, and there's going to be some that are just new to the technology. Additionally, one thing that's really critical is that we're expanding class offerings to have a number of classes that are specifically focused on the use of AI, which I think is really, I think, quite important for equipping our students for the future workforce. And then finally, we're creating a number of AI labs where companies have problems that they want to solve, but are sort of unsure of how to work with AI. And our students who have interest in learning are going to try to apply whatever they've learned in class to help solve problems. And it creates this nice synergies across companies and our students. So with that in mind, one thing I will say before I transition to the next section, just thinking very big picture. I think there is risk of overhyping the near to immediate term implications of AI. A lot of people are expecting AI to change things overnight. And I see a lot of hysterical discussion about AI. So for example, some people talk about AI taking over civilization, or like maybe you've heard people at cocktail parties talk about this notion of P-doom, which is like, what is the probability you place on AI just like wiping out humanity? And there's a lot of credible folks who compare the development of AI to the discovery of fire, meaning it's like incredibly important for humanity. But that sort of point, I think, is quite polarizing. What I would encourage all of you to do is try to abstract away from some of those statements, which I think are sort of meant to be either like really salacious or clickbait. And then instead, I would say it's quite important to recognize that AI is here to stay. I think just thinking practically, AI is poised to transform society over the next 2 decades. AI is just beginning to grow in terms of its mainstream applications, but there's no obvious upper limit on where it's going, and the models are continuing to get better, and there's no sign that I can see yet of it slowing in terms of growth. And what that means is we need to prepare, or also our students need to prepare. So with that in mind, I thought I'd talk just to you guys a little bit about like how LLMs and these AI models work. But before I do so, I want to pause because I really meant this to be this interactive discussion, and I want to make sure that you have opportunities if things come up. Okay. I won't cold call people, so I won't force you, but okay, so here we go. I'm going to keep pressing ahead, but please do interrupt if questions come up. So what I want to do is spend a couple minutes giving you a Redux primer on LLMs, which stands for large language models. LLMs are what most people are using in terms of these frontier generative AI models, things like ChatGPT that you may be familiar with. So LLMs are like in many ways trying to mimic human intelligence. And an important part of what makes us intelligence as humans is that we can use information from the past to predict what might happen in the future. And AI systems like LLMs, they try to mimic human intelligence by essentially creating a prediction machine. And that's the point that I really want you to take away from them. LLMs are prediction machines, but they're trained on trillions of words from books and from the internet, but not just words, as I'll talk about in a little bit. So if we think about what an LLM is doing, An LLM is essentially is an AI system that takes inputs like the one on the left. Like, for example, you may input something like the cat sat on the, or elementary my, or 4 score and 7, and you input it into the LLM, and the LLM, what it's trying to do is predict what is the thing that is likely to come up next. So cat sat on the mat, and elementary, my dear Watson, and so forth. Well, how does it do this? Well, the LLMs work by training on trillions of tokens. And tokens you can think of as just like pairings of words or phrases. So tokens can be individual words, they could be pairs of words that commonly occur together. But LLMs are trained on trillions of words, the frontier models that exist today. And just to put that in a little bit of perspective, suppose that like the average person reads 200 words per minute, and that, I think even that's being generous. And so imagine that a human spent an 80-year life, the entire life spent only a reading, that person would read roughly 8 billion words. And so when LLMs are so powerful is because they're essentially trying to use like everything that's been written by, it's machine readable, and then learn from that based on constantly trying to process some statement and then predict what's the word that's going to come up next. And at first, these LLMs perform very poorly because they generate garbage. But by learning over time, they can generate really amazing output. So after being trained on these billions of sentences, LLMs can do something very useful, which is really key and why they were so impactful in terms of adoption. So what exactly can it do? It knows that when you type in the sentence, the cat sat on the, and you put that into an LLM, what's really happening under the hood is it generates this following table. So imagine that every stage in the process is generating a table like the one on the right. And what does that table contain? That table contains two columns. The first column is every possible word that could come next. So imagine just every single word in human language or in English language. And then the second column in that table is the probability for how often that word shows up next to the phrase the cat sat on the when it trains on those trillions of books, of articles, of comments. And just to help you interpret what this means is if you look, for example, like at the table on the right, what that means is the cat sat on the next word that shows up in those trillions of words of books was roughly mat, 20% of the time, meaning 1/5 of the time the mat came up, roughly 1/20th of the time the cat sat on the fridge. So what the LLM does is it tries to take the word that is most representative from that corpus of training, and then essentially append it into the original prompt, and then run that amended prompt through the LLM again. And it builds and it builds and builds until it reaches what's called an optimal stopping conditions. One thing to note is that if you've had some experience working with LLMs, you may have realized that if you entered the same prompt, sometimes you're going to get different responses than the prompt that you just entered previously. And the reason why it does this is because LLMs are essentially going to try to create outputs that match these probabilities. Meaning if you type in the cat sat on the roughly 100 times, 20% of the time it's going to generate mat. And then 5% of the time it's going to generate fridge, which means that that can help explain why when you work with an LLM, even if you give it the same prompt, you can get different outputs. So when it does that, it then transforms into something very useful. Just as a sidebar, for most people, when they've heard of AI, most people are familiar with ChatGPT. And in case you weren't familiar, it's called GPT because as an acronym. So G within GPT stands for generative. What does it mean is because just as I showed you on the prior slide, it can generate the next word. When you give it a prompt, it knows what the next word is, and then will then append that to your prompt and then add it, then run it again. It's pre-trained, or that's what the P in GPT stands for, because it was pre-trained on a lot of text from the internet, from books, from other sources. It's also going to, for example, use that same type of design on other types of media, including things like video and audio, as I'm going to show you. The T within GPT stands for transformer, and transformer refers to the type of neural network that the machines use to learn about how things mapped from one process input to the next. And it's essentially, it tries to mimic the structure of the brain in the sense that it has this like neural network map about how things are connected. And it's way, way more complex than any person can sort of explain or visualize, simply because it has billions upon billions of connections. But that architecture that it uses is called a transformer. That's just the machine learning terminology. So when you do that, what happens is the prompt then goes into the LLM and it generates an answer. But the reason why LLMs are so powerful is because they learn to figure out what do we like. It's not just what it thinks is next. It gets feedback based on our responses or how we engage with that point. Specifically, the answer when LLMs were originally trained was that it was passed on to human rating. So imagine that you typed in the cat sat on the, and it gave you some nonsense like the cat sat on the aardvark. The human then would then input this and say, no, I don't like that. And we're going to pose a penalty anytime you give me an output like that. And the reward model then goes back to the LLM that says, okay, make sure that you learn from the stuff that people like or don't like. And this is what's called reinforcement learning. It's essentially asking the LLM to output and seeing if we like what they like. And when this happens, for example, like if you type into the GPT, explain the moon landing to a 6-year-old, and it gives you back some nonsense, like explain the theory of gravity to a 6-year-old, which is not what you were looking for, then the rating system essentially transfers it into a numerical amount. It says, gosh, this is a really low rating. Out of a possible 1, you get a 0.02. But if you typed in something that was quite nice, you would say, if GPT instead told you, well, people went to the moon in a big rocket, walked around and came back to Earth, took pictures and sent them back so we could all see. Okay, this is a useful way to describe the moon landing to a 6-year-old, and that gets put into the reward model and gradually learns over time. But this isn't something that just happens behind the scenes. Each time you use an LLM, it's learning from that. So for example, for those of you guys who've had experience using ChatGPT, if you type in some prompt that says, for example, explain the difference between these two terms, often what you'll see is this thumbs up, thumbs down feature. What does that mean? Is if you click on thumbs up, it learns, okay, gosh, we want to make sure we reward this type of answer in the future. Let's generate more output like that. Whereas if you put the thumbs down, it learns over time not to give you that type of output. And so all of this is possible because of that like billion parameter, the architecture of using a neural network. Okay, so just to give you guys a little bit of preview of these frontier LLMs, most people are familiar with ChatGPT, which was made by a company called OpenAI. However, there's more than just OpenAI at the frontier. Another version of this, which I like quite a bit, is one called Claude, which was developed by a competitor to ChatGPT or OpenAI called Anthropic. I'm going to show you some of what Anthropic can do in a little bit. Additionally, Google was kind of late to the game and they had some initial hiccups, but now they've generated a quite useful model called Gemini, which you can use for free if you have a Google account. If you go to aistudio.google, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that as well. So over the next couple of slides, I want to show you just a little bit about why I think generative AI is so useful for us as professors, and then just show you a little bit how I use it. So this point about LLMs being quite useful is not something that I think is just experience-based. There's also a number of randomized controlled experiments that make this point. So there was the study written by some of my colleagues at MIT that gave workers a writing assignment, and they gave some of them access to GPT. And so they saw how they changed before and after access. And so here's a plot on the left of the time they took to complete this writing assignment. And in the dotted line are the control people, the ones that never got access to GPT, and in green were the ones who got access. And you can clearly see it reduces the amount of time taken to answer some writing assignment. It's also the case that when you look to see what happens is it tends to improve grades, meaning that the people who had access to GPT didn't just write faster, they tended to get higher marks on what they provided. It's also the case, which is arguably the most promising but also controversial point, is that AI can help level the playing field. So if you draw your eyes to this bottom chart, what is it plotting? Along the y-axis is the grade that participants received on the second task, and along the x-axis is the grade they received on the first task. And what you might expect is that there is sort of this perfect 45-degree line, meaning that if I got a bad grade in the first assignment, I'm going to do bad in the second assignment. But as you can see, the ones that really benefited the most were the ones at the lower end of the grade scale, meaning the people who did poorly at the first try were significantly better off when they had access to GPT, and essentially flattens off this grading curve in a way that I think a lot of people view as promising for reducing inequality. There was a number of other studies, one of which was written by looking at software engineers who had access to what's called GitHub Copilot. You can think of this as ChatGPT, basically as an inline code editor. And they gave them the same assignment, and they gave some people access, they randomized access to this Copilot. And what you can see is the distribution is the amount of time that people took to complete their task. And coders that were treated with an AI programmer were not only more likely to complete the task, they basically cut the time that they took to complete the task in half. And what's so remarkable about this result, and this is a paper that was written, over a year ago, was you could already start to see how this was going to change the nature of work. What I mean by that is that the coders were able to sort of outsource this mundane work and instead shift focus to more creative and complicated problems. And so if you're someone who has these tasks which are sort of annoying and repetitive, oftentimes they're quite useful for applications to AI and allows you to kind of draw focus on the stuff that you find sort of more fulfilling and potentially more complicated problems. So I think AI is going to be incredibly useful as long as people learn how to harness it correctly. But these are very large sample studies. It's easy to get lost in some of the details of these experiments. So I thought I'd talk just a little bit about how I use it. So just here's a couple examples. One is I make the point to people that I use AI every day, and I use it because I think there's an important learning curve to it, but also because it makes me a lot more productive. So I typed in, as I was preparing for this presentation, I said, create a funny monologue in the spirit of Stephen Colbert. Make the focus of the monologue to welcome music therapy professors at Berklee College of Music. And of course, it generated a set of output, which is useful. It says, music therapy is fascinating. It's like regular therapy with a killer soundtrack. I have no idea if that's true, but it got me started. So it's basically the only profession where you can prescribe Stairway to Heaven without a medical license. Okay, I don't know if that's true, but it's getting me started and it's quite creative. I also have found it incredibly useful for generating lecture slides. So as part of my role as the PhD program director, I often teach PhD students, how do you engage in effective communication? Okay, I nickname this class, How to Talk Good and to Write Gooder. And what I do is I teach students very basic communication skills. So I took this book, which I liked, called The First Minute, How to Start Conversations to Get Results. And I jumped it into Google AI Studio, which is Google's Gemini model that I mentioned earlier. And what's so powerful about this Google AI Studio is it has now a 2 million context window, meaning that you could drop in the entire corpus of Moby Dick or several textbooks, and it could read that whole thing in about 2 seconds. And what that means is it can process everything that's happening within that. And so I said, just, give me a slide deck that is going to basically cover the content of this book. And what it does is it generates slide by slide everything I need to know in terms of here's how I would teach it to students. And it just saves incredible amount of in terms of generating slides. But even this is becoming out of date because there are increasing programs that can do this for you. Additionally, I use AI as a teaching assistant. So I'm just going to get this video started and then I'm going to explain what's happening. So this is a screenshot from Claude's recent Sonnet model. Claude just recently released a new model, and I was using this to try to create interactive tools. And essentially, I was teaching a finance class where I was trying to teach my students how important it is that they pay attention to fees when they're thinking about evaluating a return investment. So I typed into Claude, create this interactive tool that could show how fees will affect long-term investment returns. And it says, sure, I'd be happy to do this. Let me create what's called a React component, which essentially means I'm going to code this all up in Python for you. I know exactly what you're looking for. And what it does is it's trying to implement this interactive tool that I could use in the classroom. Because while students can intuitively understand that fees are going to reduce your investment performance, it's hard to visualize how big of an impact that's going to be. So notice it's running all this on autopilot. I'm not even touching what's happening here. And it's saying, okay, what we're going to do is give people these flexible parameters to be able to understand how AI is going to, or sorry, how fees are going to impact what's happening. And then you're going to be able to use it and directly interact with it. And so it says, I've created this interactive investment tool. What you need to initially input is your investment amount, the annual return that you're expecting, how long you're going to hold this, and then look at annual fees. So what I want you to do is draw your eyes to the right. So notice it's plotting two different charts and it's varying based on how much fees is there. And it can immediately create this diagnostic tool that students can visualize. Oh my gosh, if I invest in a fund that has a 0.5% fee versus 2.5%, wow, my retirement savings is going to look really, really different. And so if you can start to think about how these applications could work for you, what's so striking is that it can create these very nice looking tools without you needing to code or program, just by being specific about what you're looking for. It's also the case, it's not just for teaching assistants, it's also just in general. One thing that's very confusing to people is that LLMs, they're called large language models, and it gets people thinking that they just handle text. But in reality, they're quite capable in handling things like images. So I tell people LLMs are useful to think about as a multimodal assistant, meaning that the modes can vary, things like text, but also images and even audio. So LLMs are not just for text. It can essentially see the picture that you upload. So here I took a picture of some music notes. Maybe I don't know if any of you guys recognize this song based on the lecture notes or the notes. I did not, but I just uploaded it to GPT. And what it says is, oh, this is Mary Had a Little Lamb. It provides a match melody to the traditional nurse rhyme. And it's simple, recognizable. If you want the notation here, you can take it here and you can, give it to your students. I think that's right, but I'll have to take your word for it. But it's also the case that can handle much more complex things. So I have no idea what music therapy is. And so I'll just be honest here. But I Googled music therapy and I saw this photo. I don't know if this person's here today. I assume they're not. But this is like this very grainy photo of this person working at a whiteboard. And it says, okay, help me to understand what's going on. And it says, oh, this person's talking about secondary determinants. Now, if you're having to squint at this image, even when I see it in high resolution, I had no idea what it was doing. But it says the left side of the whiteboard contains a section called secondary determinants, and here's the topics that people are referring to. And then it points to what's happening on the right, which I can barely read the handwriting, but it says like these are Roman numerals representing chords in a major key. And so I don't know, but it's starting to illustrate how powerful the vision capabilities are. And it's essentially trained just like those broader LLMs I showed you earlier, where they're taking almost every possible image that they can get their hands on to figure out how do they fill in. So I think I saw someone in the chat, but I have no idea if that person, yeah, okay.
That's music theory, not music therapy, Eric.
Apologies. Okay, all right. So good to know. Well, another thing that I did, which is quite useful, is this Google Gemini feature that I mentioned before. It can take a 2 million token context limit. Now that's like hard to appreciate how much that is, but what it essentially can do is you can take an hour-long high-resolution video of you lecturing. And let's say that like you took a video of yourself lecturing, maybe you took this video today, and you wanted to do a couple things. You wanted to create a summary of what we discussed during this call. Maybe you decided that there wasn't a good pre-reading that I can give to my students for this, so I'm just going to have the AI generate a reading material that I can then give to my students. But also, I want to make sure that people were listening. So what I'm going to do is have them generate a quiz. So I took this lecture video of me, this class that I was mentioning, Alphanomics, that I teach, and then it could generate like a whole bit of lecture notes. It could tell me, here are the sets of questions that came up where maybe the lecture slowed down, so that it told me next time, oh, I should make sure to address that head on so the question doesn't keep coming up. And then it generates a quiz based on what I described and then gives the answer just to help students figure out, did they understand what's happening? So you can start to see how capable these things are capable of helping us. It's also the case that in this communications class that I teach, I have students upload videos of themselves speaking, and then you get feedback. Well, for example, when I uploaded this video of myself, it would say, "Oh, the professor is very engaging and like speaks loudly, but he paces a little bit too much, and like he sticks his hands in his pockets." And so like you can get a lot of feedback on details of yourself teaching as well. So this point about multimodal assistant, I thought I'd just emphasize a little bit more. So I have this very kind video that Minwang kindly provided of himself teaching his music therapy class. And so I won't play you the whole video, but you can start to see of like some of the potential usefulness of this. So you may recognize the song. Mingwan, I think this is a song from Frozen. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. The students were chilling and we wanted to do some Disney songs. It was the end of the semester, they were stressed, so they wanted to do some Disney songs in class.
Okay, I will say Berkeley looks a lot more fun than MIT, but we don't sing songs there. But I said, give some notes on the harmony and pitch. Suggest edits to make it more useful for music therapy and why. And it said, well, the group has a good understanding of harmony and pitch and is clearly comfortable working together. However, it then goes on to say, their voices could be a little bit louder and softer depending on the motion they're trying to convey. This would make the song more interesting and engaging for music therapy. It says, for example, the singers could get louder when they sing about the storm and softer when they sing about the snow, which I guess is part of Frozen. And so effectively what it's doing is it's actually processing what's happening on within the video. You can start to see why this is incredibly useful as particularly as you guys are teaching people, I don't, or using videos of people engaging in singing or practicing, they can get direct feedback on how they're doing. So just so in case it's not clear in terms of what's happening, under the hood, Gemini Pro is processing your video. What's happening here is the following. Essentially, what it's doing is it's engaging. The first step is frame extraction. The videos are initially processed by extracting a few frames per second, meaning every second within Minwang's video, it's taking these quick snapshots. And then what it's doing is that each frame is then analyzed to observe what's going on in there. There was a piano on the left, there was a series of students. It's taking a perspective on facial expressions. And then what it does is it converts each of these into tokens, which are the units that are consumed by the LLM when it's training. And it's converting them into numbers so that the computer can figure out what's happening. And then also process the audio. And then finally, the LLM is trained, once everything's tokenized, is trained on algorithms to help interpret them. And when it does that, you can see that it can generate very powerful feedback. So it turns out that AI is multimodal in the sense that it can be quite useful in producing, for example, audio. So some of you guys may be familiar with recent AI companies that emerged in the music space. So one of which is Suno, another one's Udio. So I went to Suno.com or Suno.ai, and I asked it to generate a song for my daughter, her name's Jay, and I named her Jay Bear. I don't know why. I've called her this since she was a baby. And she loves to rock climb and she loves Lululemon clothes, despite only being 11. So I just typed that into Suno. And then what it outputted was a pretty impressive song, at least to me, at essentially 30 seconds. So it says, 11 years old, chasing lofty dreams. Yeah, hands like iron, heart so pure. Every hot piece she gonna endure. Women fit tight, company's up. It's a 4 shades girl. All right, so I won't play you the whole song, but the point is, look what took me 20 seconds to develop. I have zero musical skills, but what I simply told it is that she likes to rock climb, she likes Lululemon clothes, and here's her name. And it not only generated the song, which was like, wow, I could never do that, but it also outputted the lyrics and gives you the opportunity to edit it. And so you can start to see how the barriers for music production are going way, way, way down. Now, some of you may be listening to this audio clip and saying, well, okay, it's kind of, maybe it's easy to generate music that just like, sounds like whoever you want. But this is becoming quite controversial. So maybe you guys saw this set of articles that happened, I think, last week. So there was a series, for example, of AI generated music, and one that really caught the attention was this one that appears to sound like Drake. So appearing to sound like Drake is an entirely different proposition. I'm just going to play you a little bit of clip of that video. So this is an AI generated version of Drake from that company Suno. Okay, so I won't bore you with the whole audio, but like to me, it sounded incredibly like Drake. In fact, it said Drake was, on Twitter or social media saying, "I've lost touch of reality." That sounds exactly like me, but I didn't generate that song. So what was happening was that these LLMs were being used to train on the corpus of all possible music to get just like LLMs are trained on text. And of course, it's very controversial. The record labels, not surprisingly, are suing these AI music generators, including Suno and Udio, because they worry about copyright infringement. Now, whether this is actually going to have a meaningful impact is unclear, but it is the case that like these music generators are incredibly powerful. They're not that expensive now. And so if you wanted to use them to generate specialized songs that are tailored to your specific audience that have a specific pitch, all that stuff is easily accessible now. Okay, all right, keep pressing ahead. So on the horizon, a number of AI systems are coming up that are incredibly useful and that I could imagine could be useful for people who teach music therapy. So OpenAI recently released a new version of their frontier model called GPT-4o. Now, that model is freely accessible. However, the GPT-4o also has these new voice features, which are not yet released, but will be later this summer, which can reason across audio, vision, and text in real time. So imagine being able to show the AI system with your phone what's happening around you. It can process everything that's hearing, it's seeing in real time. So let me just show you a very quick demo of this new technology and just to give you some sense of what's happening in the near future.
Hi, who's here? Hello. We are ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is a bass with a deep, low, booming voice. And O is a French soprano with a high-pitched, excited voice. Okay, so what I want you guys to do today is, it's Friday, May 10th, and we're in San Francisco. I want you to sing me a song about this. I want you to layer over each other, and I'm going to continue to give you instructions as you sing, okay? San Francisco, in the month of May.
Month of May. The 10th, it's a Friday. Of what May?
Okay, sing faster. San Francisco, in the month of May, in the month of May. Can you sing even faster than that? San Francisco, in the month of May, in the month of May. Okay, now go back and sing slower. And really try to harmonize here. San Francisco.
San Francisco.
In the month of May.
In
But maybe make it more dramatic and make the soprano higher. San Francisco in the month of May.
San Francisco in the month of May.
It's a Friday, come what may.
We are harmonizing.
Okay, so hopefully you can start to see why that's incredibly useful. There's a couple things that I would say you may notice in that video. One is that the system actually could replicate human voice quite well, and it was sort of a weird one that they chose. But the ones that are often popularized, they sound a lot like Scarlett Johansson. Maybe you've seen some of the press around this. It's also the case that you can like directly interact with these AI systems like you would another human, meaning that like if Ming-Wan starts to talk, I can immediately cut him off if I want to be rude. You can do the same thing with these AI models, meaning there's almost zero latency between what you say and what it can process. The same thing is true in terms of its vision capabilities, meaning that if I were to show a video of Mingwan dancing, it could process in real time what he was doing. And as part of this, you can start to see how interacting with these models could be incredibly useful as a coach as people are thinking about using AI to sort of learn to improve. So a key takeaway that I want you guys to have from today is simply that there are the AI systems that exist today. And if you get caught up on some of the glitches that exist, you'll miss out on the path of change. The direction of travel is quite clear, that these models are improving so fast and their capabilities keep expanding that it would be a real risk to dismiss the technology. So it's also the case that even if you don't want to use it for singing or processing video or writing, some people are surprised to hear that AI is quite powerful for creativity. So oftentimes we have to brainstorm about things. And I think what I've noticed in talking to various, like school boards or corporations is that many people have this prior that like human creativity is like a human domain specific thing, meaning that humans are really the ones who can generate the best ideas. But I'm going to argue that AI systems are quite useful for this. So for example, it's just the case if you look back in scientific history that breakthroughs often occur by sort of connecting seemingly unrelated but pre-existing ideas. But AI is so powerful as a creative tool because it's specifically trained to make those connections. When I talked about building these neural networks to understand how various pieces fit together, it's essentially mapping this like 2 billion dimension space in which things are mapped together. So if you remember that LLMs are trained by studying connections between these tokens, they may seem unrelated to humans, but they actually have this deeper meaning. And that's where these tools are quite useful. So for example, there are a number of studies that say, I'm going to generate 3 random words. Let's just say like, I don't know, monkey, dishwasher, wrench. And you ask students to come up with some business ideas about how to use that. It's the case that when you have LLMs generate that and the students generate, and you put that in front of judges, judges seem to like what the LLMs generate, meaning it's really powerful to work creatively next to you. And so I use LLMs every day because it's not just useful for generating output, for synthesizing data, it's because it works sort of like this very smart research assistant that can help me in generating ideas, and it's really expanded a lot of my productivity. So AI is already quite useful, but the news is not all good. So I mentioned this section as power and pitfalls. One thing that's quite important for us as educators is that AI poses a real significant challenge to us. So Ethan Mollick, who's a graduate of MIT Sloan, he's become sort of famous in the AI space. He's a professor at Wharton. He describes this as the homework apocalypse. So I don't know how often you guys assign students a written assignment and they hand in something, a written assignment. Now, most of assignments on the planet can be solved by AI. Maybe not PhD level stuff, but most undergrads, certainly all high school related work. And so a lot of people out there who want to sell you products to convince you that you can use AI to detect other AI. And the short answer is no, you cannot. So there are these services designed to detect AI writing. That's true, but they often fail, and they fail in some really bad ways. To the extent they work at all, they could easily be defeated by making slight changes to the text. So a student enters the homework assignment you give them, it generates a little bit of output. You tell the LLM, actually rewrite this as if I was an undergrad student, and I do a really good job of that. Or maybe you say, oh, I know it's AI because they use the word like henceforth or something. Well, you just cut that out and suddenly the LLM can't do it. It's also the fact that these detectors have high false positive rates. I mean, sometimes they'll flag people as using AI. And moreover, they tend to do it precisely for non-native speakers who don't really understand the context of giving replies to things. So look, we know if you're a native English speaker, look about parlance and basic slang that makes it easy for us to identify as human, these systems really fail. And so it's really important to be thinking about, can your assignment simply be uploaded to one of these LLMs and where they generate the output that you're looking for? This is really problematic because some of the frontier models, and they are behind a paywall, meaning that you have some students who can afford access to these AI systems and some who can't. And you really risk of giving people grades when they didn't even do the work. They just input it into an AI because they could afford it. The implications for educators is that students already using it. They may not admit to using it, but they are using it and they will continue to use it. And so there's a number of steps that people are using sort of as stopgaps. One is that there's a shift towards more in-person evaluation and paper exams, meaning that, like, for example, we brought back a lot of paper exams where we asked students to sit down without their computer or just a pen and paper and say, like, explain to me what we discussed. It's also the case that we are training students to help discern good AI output from bad AI output, meaning that, like, we teach them the importance of not just relying on the AI output. You need to understand what it's generating and put your name behind it. It's also the case that we teach people a lot of AI skills, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So LLM output, of course, can be problematic. Maybe you've seen a lot of articles that talk about some of the biases that exist in LLMs. Why are there biases in them? It's in part because they learn from text on the internet. So if you've ever read a YouTube like comments thread, people are not nice on the internet. And so if you ask LLMs, they often display biases against women or minorities. They often reinforce stereotypes. And also they tend to hallucinate. And hallucinate here, I just mean you ask them about the existence of like some academic paper, and it will confidently assert that you need to cite this paper, but this paper never really existed. There's also some evidence that use of AI can, in some circumstances, make people lazy or careless, meaning that if they just rely on AI, they don't really know how to think creatively. And so one of the messages that I've given to people is like to remember to my students that your creativity is like a muscle that you need to sort of strengthen and flex over time to stay sharp. And if you simply rely on AI, it really reduces that ability. It's also the case that AI poses the challenge of potential herding. So if everyone uses LLMs for information, it stops people from producing new information. And one of the starkest illustrations that I saw was the chart at the bottom. These were the number of new posts that showed up on Stack Overflow, which is a website where coders post whatever creative coding solution they have for particular problems. And what's the dotted line on the right side of this chart is the arrival of GPT. Essentially what happened is as soon as GPT became available, people no longer went to Stack Overflow to sort of find out how to code something. They would simply ask GPT and suddenly people stopped posting. And what that means is potentially the reduction in creative output made by humans. It's also the case that there's a lot of potential for bad information feedbacks. So for example, you get into this world of AI interactions. So imagine that you go to an LLM and you say like, is policy X effective? And the LLM says no. And then what the human does is it takes that output and it posts it on social media and Facebook or wherever and says, gosh, policy X is clearly not working. What that then means is that the LLM's new training data will then sort of overrepresent the idea that policy X is not working. And so what that means is we run this risk of a lot of the content that is being used to train these LLMs can sort of be misleading. Now, of course, any discussion of AI challenges wouldn't be complete with the fact that we are confronting a new era in society in terms of how easy it is to generate manipulative content. So AI can massively expand how information is presented in misleading ways. So you may have seen some of these pictures on the internet. These are, even now a year old of the Pope, in a puffer jacket. All of these images are completely fake. But the truth is, when you look closely at these AI generated images and you hold them side by side with real photographs, it's extremely, extremely difficult to tell them apart. And so what that means is like we really need to be confronting the fact that there's going to be a lot of content which looks extremely credible. It's going to sound like Drake. It's going to be able to generate video content, but it's not actually generated by humans and is misleading. So I think a lot about this quote from this German philosopher who mentioned, if everyone lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. And I think I don't know how necessarily this applies to music therapy. I can tell you that this is like very, very important in a lot of other contexts, like in terms of politics, clearly, but also in terms of financial markets. And so I've been training students to really grapple with the fact that we can't simply trust information that we see anymore. So, for example, you may have noticed that in the run-up to the November election, there's a number of deep fakes, for example, of Biden, of Joe Biden already saying like, don't no need to vote for me. You can just text this number, and so that people don't bother showing up to the polls. And why that's of course problematic is that for many people, they're not trained to really recognize that that content that they're used to seeing as proof of something is simply no longer going to hold. Okay, so just like looking back, looking forward in terms of stuff I'd recommend to you. First is some recommended reading. Of course, I'm happy to share these lecture notes. There's a couple books that I highly recommend. Power and Progress on the left is written by some of my colleagues at MIT that talk about like what have we learned from past technological revolutions in terms of what are the implications for society. There's the middle book, The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, who's the chief AI engineer at Microsoft now, who talks a lot about how AI is going to change medicine and therapy in the future. I recommend that. Finally, the book on the right is this guy, Ethan Mollick, who's a graduate of MIT Sloan. He wrote a book called Co-Intelligence, and it just gives a framework for like thinking about AI practically. I think it's a really great, easy to read book, gives lots of examples. So if you look at this Coming Wave book, it highlights the fact that throughout human history, technological waves have followed a very similar pattern. So like if you look, for example, at the invention of factory systems, the arrival of the printing process, electricity, or the internet, they have all followed this very same pattern, which is as the new technology emerges, people tend to use it to expand the production of goods. They make better products or produce more efficiently at lower prices. So imagine that you're in the music industry and you want to give tailored content because people like to hear their own name, or you can make it faster, you can make it cheaper. This is going to drive more demand for these products. And competition for these cheaper, higher quality products is then going to feed back into the technology improving more. The tech becomes cheaper, more powerful, and more widely available, and we see this start to spread throughout the economy. So historically, a lot of technology tends to follow a J curve where they kind of start out as niche technologies, meaning that like there's a couple people who really embrace AI, but then it quickly proliferates. I still think we're at the beginning parts of this J curve as it pertains to AI. In the near future, you're going to see it integrated in virtually every aspect of your life, like starting with your phones, your computers, you're going to, in the way that television content is generated, it's going to be showing up everywhere. And computing really began as like the focus of obscure academic papers. People talk about these like, 2-ton computers and couldn't imagine anyone using in their home. But like a lot of other technological waves, it quickly transformed the nature of work. But there's a very important lesson to be learned here, which is spectacular advances in a lot of these technologies like computers. For example, they've enriched a lot of people over the last few decades, but it's also contributed greatly to increased inequality. So here's a series of analyses from one of my colleagues at MIT, David Auteur, and I want to draw your eyes to the graph on the left. So this is the growth in real incomes over the past 70 years across different levels of education. So if you draw your eyes, for example, to the top blue bar, this is specifically for men with graduate degrees. You can see this rapid expansion in real income. We are richer in real terms in terms of purchasing power and by a dramatic amount. However, if you look at folks who in the red lines, the high school dropouts, or maybe in orange, the high school dropouts, you can see there's been barely any growth in this over time. In fact, their purchasing power has declined. But moreover, what's really important is not just the levels, but it's the inequality that exists across these different groups. Women have shown a similar path, though the graph shows a more upward trajectory. But what this says, or what we learned from this, is that AI is really going to change the future of work. Skill-based technologies, they drove a lot of this disparity across high and low skill workers. I think we're going to see some of the same polarizing trends, but even to a more severe degree for people who know how to use AI effectively. So the thing that was so striking and covered in this book, Power and Progress, is that technology in the past, if you really think critically about the common links, is that technology has been about allowing us to do more, but with humans always being a necessary input. But what's unique about these AI systems is they seem poised to replace intellectual labor, likely faster than robots are going to replace physical labor. So if you look historically, there's always these new jobs, like for example, like people who sewed for a living when the arrival of the Industrial Revolution and these sewing machines, they simply moved on to new types of jobs. And these new jobs replaced the obsolete jobs, but the jobs moved from physical to the intellectual. The problem or the issue, which is so different, is that AI seems poised to replace intellectual labor. And there's not a lot of good precedent for how this new form of intellectual automation is going to shape jobs. But a key point that I have mentioned to corporations and to educations and organizations is that employees are not waiting. So for example, there was this very recent study conducted by Microsoft and about how people are thinking about AI, how they're using it. And here's the key summary. The key punchline is that people are bringing their own AI to work. They're not waiting for blessing from their corporate executives. They're not waiting for the executives to sign up for some form of, enterprise GPT. Instead, they're realizing, wow, this could make me a lot more productive. And if I don't learn how to use this, I'm soon going to become obsolete. And so what they do is people sign up with their own Gmail accounts to get access to these technologies, but they're not willing to admit it to executives, at least for two reasons. One is they don't want to get in trouble. There's lots of privacy concerns related to use of AI. There's always this concern if you upload some document or type something in, the AI system can learn about you. The second is a lot of people are worried that using AI will reveal that a large portion of their job can be done by AI, and maybe we don't need that person anymore. So I think given the potential gains, it's important to create an environment that rewards creative and safe uses of AI. So when I've given talks to folks, they've often said that oh gosh, everything's moving so fast. How should I be thinking about AI? So I underscore to my students the importance of staying up to date in this quickly evolving world of AI, meaning that if you're just sitting on the sidelines seeing it fly by, it's pretty scary how quickly things can change. So when asked, I've given my students the following advice and perspective, which is there seems like there's too much focus on our students being replaced by AI. But to me, the much more immediate concern is the risk of being replaced by someone who knows better how to use AI. I think that's the real risk. And so the central message is staying up to date with AI in terms of its capabilities, in terms of making you more productive and producing better output. It's a growing imperative. So for this, when I've talked to corporations or organizations, I've often told people, maybe here's a framework for thinking about how your organization can think about adopting AI. And for this, I've introduced this acronym framework called ADAPT. And what is the A in ADAPT? The first step for individuals or organizations is you really need to assess, to build awareness of AI tools and their abilities, meaning that if you're only looking at ChatGPT, it's quite capable, but there's a lot of systems that can do many of the things you're looking to do if you just keep your eyes open. The second in ADAPT is this notion of define, which is you need to think about tasks that you do that are potentially repetitive, that would be easy for an LLM system to help replicate, and then think about incorporating that within your workflow because you'd be surprised at how much it can improve your productivity. In terms of the second A is to allocate, it's really important to allocate resources. It requires a little bit of investment to understand how to use AI productively, but I've mentioned to individuals that you really need to experience using these. If you're an organization, I say it's really important to provide funds for people to access AI tools. The P in pilot is to use AI for all tasks, which is legally and ethically permissible. What you're going to find is that AI does spectacularly well for some tasks and spectacularly poorly for others. And this is what technology economists call mapping the jagged frontier. What is AI good at and what is it not good at? But until you start to experiment with your own work, you won't really be able to know. And then finally, transform. I think what's really critical for individuals and organizations is to foster this love of experimentation and sharing, because what you're going to find as you are best suited to be able to understand how AI can affect your work And then when you discover something that's useful, report back to others. Here's what I did that saved me a lot of time. Here's how I'm thinking about using it just to scale up your projects. Maybe just to show people like how you use AI every day, sort of like what I showed you earlier. So what I've mentioned to people is consider forming an adapt task force. Maybe this is like everyone that's on the call, maybe this is people within your organization, but really to organize efforts around AI and to bring it out of the shadows. The goal is to discuss and attempt applications to be showcased to others. The problem is if you shame people for using AI, they're still going to use it, but eventually you're pushing it into the shadows where they're not willing to talk about what they're doing, and there's a lot of duplicated and wasted efforts. It's also the case that even now, but certainly over the next decade, there's going to be a lot of noise from people that like seem to talk about AI and what it can do, but until you really get your hands on it, it's hard to figure out how to best apply it. So I think AI offers significant promise to reshape work by giving us more time for tasks that are more interesting, that are meaningful, and higher value. I think that's the real optimistic vision of AI. But it's not inevitable. It depends on the path we take. And leaders of organizations have to really decide whether and how to commit resources to build AI in a way that's mutually beneficial, that's safe, and that's ethical. And because this is such a new and radically transformative technology, people are being slow to adopt it. So just in terms of planning for the future, I think it's really important to plan for the perspective.
We are
Yes.
a little bit over time. We're about 12 minutes over time for you. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought Mingwan, you told me it was an hour and a half. I was just killing time at the end.
Was that 1 hour?
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm sorry. Let me gladly stop there and just say if there are questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll share my slides with Mingwan and you can go from there. Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Jennifer.
much, Eric. It was fantastic.
Oh, great. I am happy I could help. And I guess there are no questions, so I don't want to hold you guys captive. I'm happy to sign off.
Thank you so, so much, Eric. I am going to very quickly introduce Nicole Richard-Williams. Nicole is Assistant Professor of Music Therapy at Belmont University. I believe she's going to introduce herself through a slide, and I don't want to take up any more of her time. So, Nicole, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to hear you, so go for it.
Okay. Hi, folks. Can you see the slides and can you hear me? Great. Eric, I don't know if you're still here, but that was really fascinating. And I think it gives a really good kind of groundwork for just understanding kind of what is AI and how do LLMs work and what is actually going on when we're using ChatGPT and things like that. And so hopefully I can now help us make some connections between the stuff that Eric was sharing and what we do as music therapy educators. And so as I'm going through, I have a couple spots for us to give our own, for you guys to give your input as well. And I welcome questions, thoughts, comments, whenever throughout this presentation. So, okay, briefly about me, I've been teaching at Belmont University since 2021, so just 3 years now. I recently completed my PhD in music and health sciences with Dr. Michael Tout, so I'm kind of in that NMT world. And I've had the opportunity to use ChatGPT in both research and teaching. I started experimenting it with it back in, I think it was December 2022 that when it first released, and have sort of tried different things. And I'll just share a bit about sort of what I've learned. I am not an expert by any means. I'm not using ChatGPT like every day or anything like that, but I've learned some things. I've given some thought to how to use it in teaching, and hopefully can use it as a jumping off point for also you to share if you have ideas as well. So just an overview, I'm gonna kind of hit three major talking points here. So one is thinking about ChatGPT and music therapy education. I think the big question that when I'm chatting with folks and even my own thought about this is like, how do we mitigate the possibility of academic dishonesty? When ChatGPT and other AI forms, I'm probably going to use the terms AI and ChatGPT interchangeably. That's not because ChatGPT is the only one, it's just because it's the only one that I've used. And so just just know that. The second is, how can we use it maybe as a tool in music therapy, both as educators, but also as clinicians, and how can we teach our students to use it while still maintaining and exercising that muscle of creativity, right? We don't want AI to replace creativity. That's for sure a big concern. And then for us, just as educators, how can we use it as a tool in education research? I think Eric already gave some kind of ideas of that, and I'll just share a few more. So I'd love to start with just seeing where all of us are at. So this is a little kind of opportunity for you to share. So I'm going to put this link in the chat, or you can use your phone and scan that QR code. And feel free to just type in, and I'll share my screen. I'll switch my share screen so that we can see this in a second. Sorry, I'm going to go back to that QR code in 1 second. I just need to put this in the chat. Send to everyone. Okay, there's the link. Oh, that went weirdly. Okay, I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen, and we can use this as a QR code if that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to keep that up for a moment. Let me see if I can find another way to put the link in the chat, and then I'm going to switch. So just follow the prompt and type in your thoughts there when you have a second. Oh, Lauren, you said that it worked. Did the link work or the QR code? The link worked. Okay, great. Perfect. All right, so the link is in the chat. QR code is there. And in a moment, I'm going to switch over so that we can see that Padlet together. Okay, so we've got one response so far saying, I didn't let it do anything to me yet. Okay, so some of us are taking a cautious approach. I see that there's some others writing, so we're going to wait a minute here. If this Padlet is giving you trouble, put your thoughts in the chat. We can do that as well. And if the chat is giving you trouble, you can turn on your mic, however you want to share. Okay, students are using it to create songs, which can be helpful, except for when the assignment is for them to write their own song. Aha, right. So here is that juxtaposition, right, of the potential for helpfulness for creativity, but also for replacing creativity. So that is a tricky one. I'll give us another couple minutes here. Would many of you say that you haven't really used it much yet, and that this is maybe kind of, this presentation is, you're hoping to get some ideas? Here we go. Another one here. Using it deliberately as assignment for psychology of music students. Okay, so you have them take a generic kind of AI written paper and you have them cite sources and personalize it. Okay, that's a really neat idea. Intro to music therapy class, they seem to be using it to do their homework instead of coming up with their own ideas. Yeah, so that's tricky. We'll talk about that and some strategies to kind of mitigate some of these factors. I can help proofread and consolidate ideas, absolutely. And you'll see that even some of my presentation, I use ChatGPT to help because it was a big time saver. Recently used it to summarize 15 weeks of practicum feedback for individual students. The final evaluation note that it wrote was excellent and captured my thoughts beautifully. Yeah, I've seen this a lot of times where people, even some of my friends who work like in nonprofits and lead meetings and stuff, they'll have their kind of jotted down meeting notes. They put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you create some action items? And it's able to look at some of those keywords and spit out relevant, meaningful action items, which is great, which is something that, we could I could do that, she could do that, but it saves her a lot of time. She's a mom of 3 kids, so this is huge help, right? And then helpful in writing course and syllabi descriptions, absolutely. Yeah, good. So we already have some good ways it's being used. I'm going to switch right back here to the PowerPoint, and we're going to talk about this. But all of these are kind of hitting on some of the themes we'll be talking through in the presentation. And again, if you have some experience using ChatGPT and you'd like to share it at any point, feel free. Okay, heading back to my PowerPoint. All right. So I think, as we've all probably been aware, common concern is that students are going to use it to cheat. And someone already mentioned on the Padlet that this seems to be happening. You can see this in the news that this is an issue, right? We hear about this all the time. I'll just share a couple things that have been coming up recently. Now, this is a study that was recently done at Stanford about high school students. And what they found was that first, that 60 to 70% of high school students reportedly engage in cheating, which is a high number, and I was a bit shocked by that. However, that number has not increased since ChatGPT. It has stayed consistent. And so their interpretation of that was, okay, maybe the same students who would have cheated are cheating. They're using ChatGPT now, but it's not that new students who would not necessarily have already cheated are not starting to cheat just because ChatGPT exists. And so I thought that's kind of an interesting and encouraging in some way. Again, it's with high school students, so there might be limited kind of carryover, but it's interesting. Here's a recent New York Times article talked about, do students actually know about AI? Do they use it? And I thought this was interesting. So this is teens, this is not college students, right? So it's possible that the stats would be different for college students. But USTs on average, a third of them didn't even know about ChatGPT. Almost half of them knew a little bit about it, and about a quarter said they knew a lot about it. So less than I thought. And I remember when ChatGPT first came out, I prepared this whole speech for my class the next semester to talk about my new policy for AI in classes, and I brought it up, and none of them had heard of ChatGPT. I just got blank stares, and they were just kind of they just were confused. And so I think that we maybe think about this as a huge threat and all of this stuff, but the reality is it's possible that part of our job is not trying to prevent students from using it, but actually educating them on how they can use it properly as a tool. That might be part of it. I'm sure some of them are still using it, and probably there's some academic dishonesty going on, right? I'm not trying to be naive here, but I think that there's a bit of more of a nuanced picture than we might have. Can they use it towards academic dishonesty? Sure. So I did a little test in preparing for this lecture. I was going to have us actually just use ChatGPT together and screen share, but I think that's going to crash my computer because I'm also sharing on Zoom. So I'm just going to show you what I already did. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, well, I'll just show you actually, because you can see the prompt. I'm going to do a new screen share now. Here we go. So make sure that this is here. Oh, I've got this open. Okay. So you can see here, this is my personal free ChatGPT account. I'll just give you a little tour. You can see kind of how I've used it. Boxplot, ggplot-r issue, you can see that I probably saved myself about 40 to 50 hours of work on my PhD when I was trying to code for statistical analysis. I'm not a coder. I learned some basic coding, but instead of having to browse all these chat rooms where people were troubleshooting code, I just told ChatGPT, hey, I'm trying to create, a publication quality graph for this data that's colorblind friendly, etc. It would give me code 80% of the time. It would be almost perfect. And then with a bit of troubleshooting, I had the code quickly. So that's most of my ChatGPT use. And so, but here's what I looked at today, or the last couple of days. Okay. I had it write a song for me. Oh, actually, it's not showing up here. Okay, so I'm going to ask it to do it. Write a 1,000 word essay in APA 7 style on the benefits of music therapy for infants in the NICU. Sound good? Anything else? That sounds pretty good. Okay, let's see what it does. Okay, it's writing my essay for me. So far, so good, yeah? Looks pretty good. It's getting some pretty key topics. We won't read the whole thing together, but I'll let us kind of skim it. Here's the references. Good, it's using pretty good APA 7 style, which I wanted. Has the DOI links there too. Okay, so if you haven't used ChatGPT before, if you've used it before, you're probably like, yep, that's about right. If you haven't used it before, you're probably like, oh no, right? So we've got Stanley, you know, a couple of her papers are there. We know that she's a big source for NICU. Let's just look at the first paragraph here. Okay, music therapy is increasingly recognized as a valuable therapeutic intervention for infants in the NICU. I'm going to skip forward a little bit, talks about music therapy. Essay explores the benefits of music therapy for infants in the NICU, including improvements in physiological stability, neurodevelopmental outcomes, parent-infant bonding, and overall developmental progress. I don't work in the NICU, but just my own knowledge, I think those are probably pretty common goals, right? And if we scroll down, it seems to be addressing each of these pretty well. We've got it looking at some studies, citing some studies here, maybe not perfectly citing them, but pretty good, right? So certainly students could use this to cheat. So, oh, Amy having to run. Bye, Amy. I think it's being recorded, so you can always look back if you want. Okay, so we're gonna come back to this in a little bit, but it's pretty good, right? It's not perfect though. So certainly students could use it, right? In writing, they could use it to cheat. You know, a lot of the classes I teach are like clinical guitar for music therapy, piano for music therapy. A lot harder for them to use ChatGPT to cheat because they are to practice or don't. But in these writing heavy courses, you know, it is possible. So let's talk about this first. Okay, we'll talk about all the benefits and ChatGPT is a tool in a minute, but let's just talk about this first. So a lot of folks have talked about, you know, if AI can be used this easily and generate kind of information that seems pretty darn good that easily, we need to find alternate ways to assess students' learning to ensure that they are actually using their own creativity and their own process and research. So I'm going to go through some ideas in a minute for that. The other thing we can do is look for specific ChatGPT flaws by checking. The one I found them is the most helpful is checking references. If we went back and clicked those DOIs, they would link to real papers, but they would not be the ones that ChatGPT cited, okay? The ones that ChatGPT makes up authors, it's a very good BS tool. And so the number one way I've found to double check, if I'm reading a paper and I'm like, this just doesn't feel like it's in the student's normal voice, I go and I check their references. And if the references check out, that's a really good sign because ChatGPT does not get references right 80% of the time, unless sometimes if they're open source, it can get them. but usually a student is not able to use only open source papers for an entire essay. So that's a really, really helpful tool and easy way to kind of double check. Really important to know here, ChatGPT is a text generation tool. It is not an AI detection tool. So ChatGPT cannot detect whether something was written in AI. So if you take your student's homework, you copy and paste it into ChatGPT and you ask it, was this written, did you write this? It will give you an answer, but 50% chance it'll say yes or 50% no. Actually, I'm not sure because it depends how it's been rewarded in the past. But regardless, it doesn't know. It cannot tell you that. Okay. AI detection software can be used, but as Eric mentioned, there are some kind of pitfalls with these, and we'll look into that. So briefly, I'm gonna kind of go over some of these things. So when I was thinking about, alternate assignments or ways that we can help students learn, to ensure to give them the opportunity to use their own brains, I had some ideas, but also I was running out of time. So I just simply asked ChatGPT, what are some ideas that educators can use to have, for alternate assignments so that students won't use ChatGPT? And it had a whole bunch of great ideas, and I'm going to share them with you. Okay. So one is to start with personalized project. I literally copied and pasted all of this. Okay. So just so you know, you can assign individualized topics, right? So if students are writing something based on their own experience, ChatGPT probably can't do that for them because it doesn't have that data in its LLM. It has not been trained on that data. A student could type in their personal experience and say, write me an essay based on this, but at least they've done the work in reflecting on their own experience, right? That's the worst that can happen. If you have them write on paper in class, of course, this mitigates all of these things. Personal reflections, again, so asking for deeper introspection, it would be hard for AI to really capture that. Another idea would be process-oriented assignments. So I've done a little bit of this, and having students require multiple, so they submit a draft, you give them feedback, and then they revise it. Seeing their work at multiple stages, it just makes it harder to submit work that's generated by AI, right? Because you actually see their process. You could do regular check-ins with students, etc. Collaborative work, right? If you have group projects and you have them collaborate and contribute, you can often see, we get to know our students. Usually in music therapy, we have smaller class sizes. We get to know how each of our students write and how they think. And so if each student is responsible for a different section, you can kind of see, oh yeah, this person did this person did this, right? That could help. Having peers review their own or review others' papers, that could be helpful as well. Creative assignments, so things that don't rely on the written word, right? LLMs, large language models, is specific to writing. And so you could have them create videos, podcasts, presentations, right? Probably AI will get there where it can generate these kinds of things, but it's not there quite yet. And so we can use these things. As well as, art and create. And see, I'm noticing here it's a little bit redundant, hey, ChatGPT. Sometimes the second bullet point is overlapping. So that there's a critique right here. But doing in-class activities can be helpful, right? If the student, I actually do all my midterms and finals this way. I print out paper tests and they do the tests in paper, and I do long answer questions. They have to handwrite it out and I read their handwriting. So I know it's their work, right? As well, oral presentations. I think this is probably one of the biggest areas of learning that we may start returning to, and just even talking to faculty in other fields. Oral exams, things like that, much more time intensive, but I think there are ways to do it. There's that type of presentation that takes 7 minutes and you have 20 seconds per slide. I'm forgetting what it's called, but anyway, there's different ways. Alejandra, you remember what it's called? I saw your
I was
face.
just thinking something similar to a TED Talk,
Yeah.
very, very concise and
right.
but informative.
Things like that. Yeah, exactly. Experiential learning. We already do this as part of our field, right? Music therapy, we have experiential learning. Research-based assignments. So having a student do an annotated bibliography, right? This is something ChatGPT can't do yet. Because it's not trained on, it's only trained on things that are open source. If there's a paywall, right? So journal articles that have a paywall. To my understanding, ChatGPT is not trained on those articles. And so getting students to write annotated bibliographies can be helpful. Writing research proposals, right? This is a different thing. If your ChatGPT is predictive based on past knowledge, but if you're having students create a research proposal of what should be researched, in the future, that can maybe mitigate. I had ChatGPT, I told it to write prompts related to my dissertation, and it was really dumb. It did a terrible job. And that was very reassuring to me that it cannot generate new ideas. It just generates text based on past ideas, right? More conversational style learning, right? Question and answer can be helpful back and forth. Debates, I'm going to go sort of more quickly through here, but portfolio assignments, reflective journals, asking students open-ended questions on essays or having them reflect on case studies. All of these things can be helpful. Pretty good job, ChatGPT, coming up with some good ideas for us. So now, what I've mostly done so far, I still have students write a traditional research essay in my classes because I do think that process is helpful, kind of like a literature review paper. But I check references. I look for kind of writing style that seems not like the student's normal writing style, right? Sometimes when a student's writing a reflection, you get a good sense of their voice because it's that personalized paper. And then if their writing style is totally different for their research paper, that flags something for me, and I will go and check those references. AI sometimes has an almost too perfect or sentences writing style, or sentences will be of a similar length, can sometimes be a bit choppy with more short sentences, but it's a little bit difficult to tell kind of what it is just based on writing style. So there's some pitfalls to that. So I would say checking references right now is key if you want to double check things. There are AI detection software. I put one up there. This is kind of one of a big one. You can Google other options, but there are issues. These software have trouble. They can recognize things pretty well if it's 100% AI generated, but the likelihood of students using, like, sort of copying and pasting that essay from ChatGPT that we created on the NICU and just like submitting that is probably rare. More likely they're going to take it and try to make it their own or make it sound similar, and the detection software is not built to detect that. I've also had a case where I had a student this year who came and chatted with me, at the end of the semester and said, hey, I had this weird thing happen to me. I had a professor from my other class come to me or bring me to her office, and she said that she suspected that my work was like AI generated, and she's like, and it wasn't, and I wrote it, and she was kind of like a bit, she was just thrown off by this because she wrote her paper. And I know this student, and she's somebody who's had a lot of struggles with writing, and her well-edited papers read very choppy and something that AI would probably flag. But actually, this is a student who has this is anonymous, so that they have a dyslexia, they have a learning disability that makes writing more difficult. And so we have to be really careful with these detection software that we don't impugn students who are actually doing their best work, right? And just as a reminder, again, ChatGPT is not an AI detection software. If you ask it whether some text was AI generated, it will give you a BS answer. Okay, so can't use ChatGPT to recognize itself. Can't do that. Okay, let's just pause here for a second. The previous slides are built on some assumptions. We're assuming that students are going to use ChatGPT to cheat. They may or they may not, but they may be trying, best case scenario, I try to assume the best and assume that students know that this is a new tool and they're trying to figure out maybe how to use it in a way that is reasonable. And so perhaps the attitude here can be not like we have to make sure they don't cheat and discourage them from using ChatGPT to cheat, and more, is it possible to have a more open and positive approach that actually teaches students how to use this software properly, but also to their benefit. And so I'm going to switch gears now. Let's start talking about how might this be actually helpful in our field in music therapy. I'll pause here. So that was my longest section, folks. The next two sections are going to be quite a bit shorter because I'm still kind of figuring this stuff out. So let me pause and just see, are there any questions, any thoughts, comments before I move on here? If no, or if you're just currently writing it in the chat, we can pause when that comes, but otherwise I'll just continue. Okay, so here are some ways that I have thought of so far that we could use ChatGPT in music therapy. One would be brainstorming lyrics for songs. Of course, there is, we want to use our own creativity, but let me show you a song that ChatGPT generated, and you can see that you would still have to use your own creativity here because it is not perfect. Okay. So there's our little essay. Okay. So I asked it, I said, I need to write a song for relaxation. The lyrics should guide the listeners to breathe deeply in and out using a square breathing technique, and then mindfully focus on different senses, one sense per verse. Can you write lyrics for this song? Okay, so it doesn't have, there's no melody here. I'd have to make up the melody, but take a deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold it gently, 2, 3, 4, let it out slow, 2, 3, 4, pause and rest now, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I might tweak that a little bit and so it can fit into a better timing structure, but not bad. Okay, the chorus would be breathe in peace and breathe out stress. Feel the calm, let go of less. That's a bit weird. Square by square, just take your time. Find your center, peace of mind. Okay, so ChatGPT seems to know what square breathing is because it created a little first verse that had the square breathing technique, right? Breathe in, hold your breath, breathe out. But now it thinks it's confused. And so, we'd have to doctor this chorus a little bit, but there's some nice things. Breathe in peace, breathe out stress. I like that. Let go of less, strange, square by square. I don't know. Right. So the creativity would have to be here, but it gives us a start. And then it goes into different verses on focus on the light, let your eyes see, colors all around, vibrant and free. Notice every shade in the way they blend. Let your sight bring peace as you comprehend. I like pieces of that, right? So you can kind of see how it can give you a really good starting place, and then it gives you something to work with. So I could see ChatGPT being akin to working with a collaborator, right? Maybe you as an educator don't always have a chance to bounce all of your ideas off of, your colleagues or things like that. But maybe you can bounce your ideas off ChatGPT, or you're having a really tired day and you need it to give you the first idea, and then you can kind of fix it up, right? That could be a really helpful tool for song creation. Also, and I don't have an example of this, but generating ideas for clinical interventions, right? All of us, I think, as clinicians, we can get stuck in a rut, stuck doing kind of similar things. Again, ChatGPT is trained on a vast amount of information, including a lot of other music therapists' blogs, anything that's available for free online. And so we could ask it for possibility, for ideas, give it a clinical goal, give it an objective, say, hey, or, what are some ways to start off this session for just kind of group cohesion? Here's my clinical group, right? And it might have some ideas that maybe aren't going to be perfect, but can give us a starting point. Okay, I'm going to go back in here. I think those are two of the main ideas that I thought are helpful for music therapy. I'm sure there's others, and if you have other ideas, feel free to chime in. So, okay. I also think ChatGPT can be helpful in writing, and here's what I think, and you'll know also why this picture is up there in a second. So ChatGPT can provide some good background information, but as Eric was talking about, it hallucinates. So it basically makes up stuff, like it made up those references and those are not real. So it hallucinated those. So I like to think of ChatGPT kind of like that know-it-all friend who really genuinely thinks they know all these things, and they actually do know a lot of things, but they're extremely overconfident, right? And so it's the actually this, right? And I feel like we all know that person who like genuinely has a lot of general knowledge and will be very confident in what they tell you, but like it's not perfect. And so I think how that's helpful in writing is when students are maybe starting an essay, and let's say they're writing about the NICU, and maybe it's an intro music therapy. They just learned that NICU is a thing. And I'm noticing a question in the chat here, a comment. Let me see. Yes, ChatGPT does not practice humility or cultural humility. That's right. It is prideful. It is biased. So we have to take all of these things into account. Absolutely. Yeah, so if, let's say, you're just trying to understand a basic concept. I've used it for this. So my PhD was in like music therapy for motor learning. And so people on my committee were like from exercise science and like neuromotor stuff. I am not a physiotherapist. I don't have that base knowledge. And even though I'd taken a couple courses in it, and I found ChatGPT helpful for clarifying certain concepts. Like I'd be reading some sort of journal article, and then there would be some sort of word that's used that's really standard language, and I don't know what it means. And I would ask ChatGPT, like, what does this mean? And it can give me a pretty good explanation, good enough that even though I know there's probably flaws in it, I can compare that knowledge it gave me with, the articles that I've read, and I can figure out where those flaws are, but at least it gave me some background. And just for time, I gave some examples, but you can go experiment with ChatGPT and ask it to explain things to you, and you can, have fun with that. I think students are often in the same boat, and I think it's okay to encourage them to look terms up in ChatGPT, because it's going to give a more colloquial and intuitive explanation than just Googling something and looking up the dictionary definition. It's going to have a little more meat to it. Some of that meat might not be real, but at least it gives some sort of starting point. So I think that is helpful. Right? It's leveling up that base knowledge to understand academic journal articles. And I think this is important because then our students who maybe came into college not as honor students, maybe they, did all their high school courses, but they were working full time because they had to help, whatever their situation is, they maybe don't have all the same base knowledge as students who had more opportunities. I think ChatGPT can help them kind of gain some base knowledge if we can teach them how to use it helpfully, right? And then when they go and do their actual research, then they have that knowledge. I'm going to skip this because just for time. I just wanted to share my ChatGPT policy that I have in my syllabus. This may change. This is what it currently is. So I have told students they can use AI as they're working on assignments, whatever those assignments are. But if they do, they must tell me in writing how they used it. And I tell them that this is for two reasons. I say, one, that we're all trying to use AI. Everybody here is trying to figure out how AI fits into our profession. And if they figured something out, I want them to share it with me so that I can help share that with other students. And two, I want them to be honest. I want them to have that academic integrity to know that if they say, well, I used AI for this in my paper, and they're not sure if that was okay or not, just tell me, and this is an experimenting time, and we can talk about, to make sure that this was good. If I suspect that a written assignment utilized AI and they didn't disclose anything, right? Let's say I noticed that references were fake. I have told students that they will have between 24 and 48 hours to come into my office for an oral discussion of their paper, and I will ask them about specific concepts and references cited. They will just have to have a really in-depth, nerdy conversation with me within 24 to 48 hours. And so my hope is that this motivates students to know what it is that they are writing, and to really know their shit, for lack of a better word. Okay. I do think that AI, and Eric was alluding to this too, I think AI literacy is important, right? We talk about this is just going to probably stay around. So I don't think we can prevent students from using it, but we have to try to help students use it skillfully and responsibly. Okay, last section, ChatGPT for educators. And in terms of research, now I will just say there's probably a lot of capabilities of AI that I have not explored yet. So I'm just sharing you what I've got so far. I have not found it helpful with content in terms of when I was writing my dissertation. Like I said, if I got it to try to write sections or give it a prompt, like write a section on music therapy via telehealth for autistic clients, which is what mine was on, and it was just meaningless. Basically, it was very vague and kind of not helpful. It might be helpful for brainstorming research ideas. Maybe, right, if you're thinking like of trying to think of new projects, or saying, hey, take me, what would be a good research paradigm for such and such topic? What would be a good statistical tool to use for a certain research topic? Maybe it would be helpful for that. I haven't tried it. I suspect that it would be. But where I have used it is in coding. So I don't know if any of you have done coding. The only coding language I've used is R, which is a free package, and it's just used for statistical analysis. But I was able to code all of my research analyses for 4 dissertation projects because of ChatGPT, right? I had the basic knowledge to use it. I had the software. I had used it before. But when inevitably there were issues with my code, I could even copy and paste, all the code that I'd written that wasn't working into ChatGPT. And sometimes it would just say, oh, you've got an extra parentheses here. That's why it's not working. And then it would say, here's your code without the parentheses. I take it, copy and paste it back in, boom, it works, right? Whereas I probably just wouldn't have been able to figure that out. And again, sometimes I would just give it, kind of say, hey, create code for this analysis, and then it would be able to create it for me. So it's extremely, extremely helpful. So I think there's lots there, not fully explored, but just want to put those ideas in our brains. Okay, and then when I think about ChatGPT as help for us just as educators in making syllabi, I know some of you already said you're using it. I think of it as like an intern or something, right? Like it's ChatGPT is maybe helpful to do those like kind of menial tasks that take so much time that we don't necessarily have to do, and it's not a hit on our creativity to outsource those things. For me, the main thing I've used so far, and I probably have a lot to learn, is in your syllabi, when you have all the dates, Monday, January 17th, Wednesday, January 19th, and you go through the semester, and then you have to change all those dates for your new syllabus. And that was always tedious. Now I just copy all those dates, put it into ChatGPT. I tell it, start with such and such date in 2024 and give me the new dates, and it spits it out, and then I copy and paste it back in. Boom, I just saved half an hour, right? So things like that, it's super, super helpful for. And I would say you can't trust it to do everything you can do, but it's very helpful for certain tasks. Most of us probably don't have an intern or a TA, so we may as well, accept the help, especially where it's not going to be compromising our integrity here. So I'm sharing, these are Channing's tips. So my colleague Channing Shippen, she's been really exploring the use of ChatGPT for kind of things like what I've just said, like those kind of menial tasks. And so she took her notes about what she does, she put it into ChatGPT, and it niced it out for her and gave it nice headings. So I'm going to share with you what her tips are, which have been beautified by ChatGPT. So in support of teaching, she sometimes does a syllabus analysis. So she'll put, a paragraph from her syllabus into ChatGPT and ask it, how can I use more concise language, or she could spit the whole thing into there. Do you have ChatGPT, do you have suggestions for a better way to organize based on such and such thing that I'm trying to figure out, right? Can give suggestions like that. It would know things like Bloom's taxonomy for learning. So let's say you've got your learning objectives and you want to rephrase them so that they line up with Bloom's taxonomy. You could say, ChatGPT, please rephrase these according to Bloom's taxonomy. It'll give you a suggestion, right? Of course, you can revise, you can take those ideas, but it can be a help in that way. It can be a collaborator. You could take it and say, okay, here's my learning goals for the course. Here are my assignments. Do I have an assignment for each learning goal? Am I missing anything, right? This is something that would be helpful. You could take the prompt for your assignment and say, ChatGPT, do this assignment and see what it spits out. If you do that on several platforms, you might get an idea of if students do that, what type, you'll be able to recognize it, right? Because you know what the platform is going to spit out because you've already done that. You could use it to edit assignment rubrics. Eric was saying something that I thought, oh, this might be helpful. I often provide students with essay feedback based on a rubric, and that takes a good amount of time, right? And I'm wondering if a time saver is, I give ChatGPT, here's my rubric, here's a student essay, what feedback would you give? And now I just double check, you know, or give students the rubric and say, here, go take your essay, put it into ChatGPT. It's going to give you a good idea of what you're missing based on my rubric, right? That might be a helpful thing. That could be a time saver for me, and students would get similar feedback than they get from me. In support of personal learning, she's talked about writing analysis. So she said that she tends to use passive voice in her writing a lot. So she'll take paragraphs, plug it into ChatGPT. It will rephrase them just using active tense, and then she just copies and pastes that back, right? So that's kind of like Grammarly, right? That's sort of what Grammarly does. Grammarly is AI, but for writing, and this is just a little bit more broad. You can use it for just grammar checks in general. You could brainstorm alternate ways of approaching organization of subject material. One thing I tried to use it for in my dissertation, I tried to copy and paste my whole dissertation in and say, of the references that are cited in the text, am I missing any from the references page? And it was like, yes, I can do that for you. And then it said, no, this is too long. I can't do it for this much text. So I think it can do that. But it doesn't do it for 100 pages or 150 pages of text or whatever I had. Overcoming writer's block. And I think this is similar to what we were talking about of sort of generating ideas for interventions, things like that. Just can be a helpful for our creativity, right? When we're having one of those days. In support of clinical work, she says she's used it to brainstorm icebreaker questions for groups, right? Generating new theme ideas for groups, identifying popular songs that would work with specific themes, right? Sometimes you're trying to think of a song, it's hard to think of one. ChatGPT might be able to sort through the entire internet for you much more quickly. In development of personal evaluation. So this one I thought was cool. You can take your student evals, put it into ChatGPT, and then say, hey, what are some common themes here? What would be some good goals for me to work on as an instructor based on, you know, this feedback? You could help it write. It could help you write a sort of narrative summary for your year-end evaluations by plugging in your CV, right? Because that's all you're doing. You're just taking your CV and writing it into sentences. ChatGPT could help with that, right? Okay, that pretty much brings me to the end of my presentation. So this is my opinions real quick. So I think that ChatGPT and AI tools can be used for academic dishonesty, but the fact that these tools exist does not mean that more students will cheat necessarily. The data doesn't actually support that. So restructuring assignments and knowing the pitfalls of these platforms can help keep the improper use at bay, but also that we can help to train music therapy students on how to use ChatGPT in helpful ways as a tool, and it might save us time as well. That is basically it. Anything anyone would like to add to this? I know some of you have used AI already. I'm also aware that it's 3:58. So
This was so helpful, Nicole. Go ahead, Sophia.
Well, I have a quick question. Just among all the educators, in addition to the ChatGPT, I would like to learn what other AI programs that we might have kind of explored. I know that Eric was talking about Gemini's, and so I would like to learn like what other programs that the educators have kind of extend like the application that you find that could also be helpful.
yeah,
Thank you.
great question. Has anyone used the Google platform yet? I think that's the other free one, right? No, I have also not tried that.
I was talking to someone pertaining to qualitative coding, and they suggested Claude as superior to ChatGPT, to the and perceived it to be so much better that they were willing to, you know, pay a monthly subscription to help them with these tasks. So Sophia, I know that Claude is another one, as Eric mentioned, but I've only ever used ChatGPT.
Thank you.
Under Microsoft.
Ming Shan is saying she's used Copilot under Microsoft. Cool. I haven't tried that one. Yeah, I think it's worth trying different platforms, right? Because they may have just little nuances that are different. I have not paid for any yet, but I think that you can get a paid version of ChatGPT, and they're generally more powerful. They can do more. So great.
I was thinking for the not the condensing necessarily, but support, help, assistance in condensing thesis and dissertations into journal articles. So this was
Yeah,
prompted by
interesting.
what you mentioned, Nicole, and then Lauren, what we were talking about earlier. So taking a thesis, taking a dissertation, that
Mhm,
can be so taxing to condense a
mhm.
100 or 200 plus page paper into 35 pages.
Right.
Somebody just put something in the
Oh
in
yeah, Melanie. So the Suno app, that's the one where it can generate songs, right? I know that's huge. That could be huge for us as music therapists to explore and see what its capabilities are. I have not tried it yet, but um yeah, that could, I mean, even working with clients, right? Maybe you want to do songwriting with a client, but there's really big like executive functioning demands in songwriting, and there you need to, that's not a goal, right? And so you're just going to songwrite using an app like this together. That could be really good, right? So
Yeah, that's the program that Eric used to write a song for his daughter.
yeah, and the song, I mean, it was catchy, right? It didn't seem like a robot wrote it. Like it was, yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for letting me share and for sharing these tips as well. There's a lot to unpack, isn't there? But I'm sure we'll all continue to learn more in the next few years about this.
Any final questions? Any final thoughts for Nicole or for us? If anybody has suggestions on topics that they would like for us to explore and to perhaps bring speakers, ideas, please don't hesitate to speak now or send us emails. Thank you to Eric. Thank you to Nicole. Thank you both so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole.